Hello, thanks for joining me for Samuel in Springtime. Today is Monday, May 24th, and we are looking at the 24th chapter of the first book of Samuel. And for those of you who read the chapter first, I'm no doubt this may be one of the best chapters you've ever read. I just think the day and age that we're living in, we need to read stories like this about magnanimity and reconciliation. We all need to take a page out of David's playbook in the way he interacts with Saul, who has pursued him, who has wanted to take his life, and has seen him as his enemy, and the way David is merciful when God delivers Saul into David's hands. So let's dig in. What happens in this story is that Saul is in hot pursuit of David. He wants to rid the world of his likely usurper, because he's the king of Israel and David would be the replacement. And we already know, Saul doesn't know this, no one else knows this, but Samuel has anointed David to be king of Israel. But and then David just has all this success in his endeavors, and so Saul sees the writing on the wall and he comes after David. He was distracted by the Philistines in the last chapter, and now, after he's done pursuing the Philistines, he continues his search for David. As he's on the path to find David, he goes to a cave to relieve himself, and in the deeper recesses of the cave are David and all his men. They discover Saul there. David goes up, creeps up to him, I guess, detected, and cuts a piece off of his robe. But he leaves him there. And he doesn't confront him until later. The men say, you need to kill him. He is, it's you or him. You need to kill him. And God has delivered, and this is also the theological part, God has delivered him into your hands. What David said, shall I harm a hair on the head of the Lord's anointed? David is putting God first by saying the Lord's anointed. Not that Saul as a person is significant, but that he is the one who God had anointed to be king over Israel. And so David fits into this type, this character, into his role as a man after God's own heart, and says, I will not harm a hair on the head of God's anointed, even though he pursues my life. And so they have a confrontation, and David creeps up on Saul, surprises him. He's there, and he spares Saul's life. And he explains why. And he shows him the piece of his cloak that he cut off. He said, I could have killed you, but I didn't. Out of wickedness comes forth wickedness, but my hand shall not be against you. Against whom has the king of Israel come out? Whom do you pursue? A dead dog, a single flea? May the Lord therefore be judge, and give sentence between me and you. May he see to it, and plead my case, and vindicate me. What I love about this part of the passage is that he's recognizing that two wrongs don't make a right. And I really think that we need to reflect as people of faith, all people of faith who hold these scriptures up as authoritative in our lives, on what it means to to proclaim out of the wicked comes wickedness. It's what you do with, what you're given. David had the opportunity to eradicate a foe. He doesn't think of his own safety. He doesn't consider his own position. He is faithful. He spares Saul's life. in the humanity and generosity of David is rewarded with Saul's grateful devotion towards him. And you have this scene where Saul speaks to David in ways that you would have heard his son Jonathan speak to David. So that's a remembrance of the covenant he made with Saul's son Jonathan. So he says, you are more righteous than I, for you have repaid me in good, whereas I have repaid you evil. So you see that we talk about this in our society now as it being the bigger person. And this is kind of probably where we get this from, this encounter where David has mercy on Saul's life, and Saul responds the way anyone would. He's not crazy at this point. He commits to David. Now I know, Saul says to David, now I know you shall surely be king. And that is really more of what comes from his conversations earlier with Jonathan. You shall surely be king. Swear therefore by the Lord that you will not cut off my descendants after me. Now we already know that some of his descendants are coming through David because he's married to his daughter. And then, of course, his close friend Jonathan. And David swore this to Saul. And Saul went home. And then David stayed in the cut, in the stronghold of the wilderness. But the thing is, like, I just love this good feeling you get from this story. If you just hold it up as it's just a chapter, given what we already know, and not the future, because of course Saul changes his tune towards David, it is a beautiful response when there is conflict between persons. And these are leaders. And I just think in our day and age today, in our families, in our political discourse, and everything in between, we needed to pull a page out of David's faithfulness and the way he revered God's chosen, anointed king. And so we apply that as maybe, if you will, as Christians, to the idea that God so loved the world, not just certain kings that are anointed, and that we would apply this kind of mercy and magnanimity, big word, but it's a perfect word here, generosity of spirit towards all those whom God so loved the world on behalf of. I hope you will think about that as you go about your days and as you encounter other people. Amen.